All right, we are ready to dive in. I'm going to get myself situated here, figure out if anyone's going to be joining us tonight. I should do more advance notice of these, I'm aware, but it doesn't seem to change the fact that no matter how much I try to plan for this in advance, I think like, oh, do I want to do this weekend? Do I want to do another live stream on Friday like I've been doing? I never can really decide until it gets to like the 11th hour. And then I'm like, yeah, screw it. I guess I'll do a live stream. So I guess that's what I'm doing now. But as always, it took me a little while to actually figure out if this is what I was going to do tonight. So, c'est la vie. So let me get situated here. I recommend that everyone have a drink because you should always have a drink. Tonight's drink, I think this was the same as last week, is Burke's Root Beer and our sponsor, Pinnacle Whipped Vodka. Pinnacle Whipped Vodka doesn't pay me a dime, but I'm still calling them our sponsor because, sometimes you just got to do these things in order to stay lubricated and free to speak and willing to speak as long as possible. So if you ever want to figure out how to make sure that you can keep blabbing on and on, just make sure that you're properly liquored up. That's always a good way to go about these things. Tonight we are going to, I don't have a central topic, but tonight we are going through, it's kind of another episode of God's Troll Army, where I'm going through the comments that have been left on the videos over the last week from Christians and allies alike. I know that sounds a little bit combative. It's not like you can't be a Christian and be an ally, but let's face it, most of the people that would consider themselves to be allies of this channel aren't exactly Christians, at least not in the traditional sense. Although there are some Christians who tell me that they really, really like my content. So I appreciate you guys very much if you are in that group. So welcome on board. And if you're not in that group and you are not, or if you're an ally, but you are not a Christian, then you're probably in the big boat here. So there's a lot of people here that like my content that aren't Christians or have some type of problems with Christians or religiosity or theism or something along those lines. But you don't have to be anti-theist or anti-Christian to enjoy my content. I know that because I've gotten feedback from people directly confirming this. So I'm going to stick with that story until somebody can prove me otherwise. All right, so let me get into this. Let me make sure that I am okay. So I'm live. That's good. I'm going to, no, that's the wrong window. I got to pull up my notes. I'm so organized, can't you tell? I know exactly what I'm doing. All right. So I did organize things a bit tonight because I want to at least front load the content, the comments from those who don't necessarily appreciate my videos and left comments that were less than flattering. But I am going to only move away from that with the very first comment that I'm going to highlight because, well, I'm just kind of, I thought it was pretty cool. So I wanted to make a point to highlight it here during this show. I can figure out, there we go, how to pull this up. I had to point this out because I got a comment from Mr. Deity on this video that I did about Glenn Scrivener's endless psychobabble and defense of the Trinity. And I thought it was great to get a comment from Mr. Deity. He says, it's difficult to remember someone being so completely clueless and entirely lacking self-awareness. He accuses Dan of poisoning the well, but begins his whole presentation by telling everyone that Dan is using tricks, thus poisoning the well. Then he gets on Dan for talking about how Christians assuming univocality, while assuming univocality. So I had to highlight that first of all, is because I just appreciate anytime someone who is in this space but has a larger audience, and he certainly has a much larger audience than me. He's got 77,000 subscribers, and he's been doing this for a long, long time if you look at his channel. So I watch his content on the regular. I subscribe to his stuff. I like all of his videos. He's really cool. So it was really neat to see that he had seen the video and had put this comment. As a side note, welcome Positivity. Thank you to the chat. I'm glad that you're here. And make some good dinner. So who is it? Somebody else, I think it's Secular Scriptures, was giving me some really funny kind of, they were saying they were annoyed with one of my videos because it was a God-free Bible study. And they said that they were planning on me reading through a lot of the boring stuff in Joshua because they were going to be like sanding a shelf or something like that. But then when I got to those points in Joshua, I said, here's why we're not going to read through all of this. So they said they didn't get to sand whatever it is that they were sanding, and they didn't get to get their work done while they were listening to this. So hopefully you can still make dinner while listening to this Positivity. But I was just, again, bringing up the fact that I love Mr. Deity, commented on this video. At the risk of sounding like a fanboy, you know, like when you're in a certain niche, and of course there's going to be bigger content creators that have been doing this a lot longer than you, and they have a lot more videos, a lot more subscribers. And you might think that we all watch each other's stuff. I don't know to what extent anyone watches my stuff. First of all, because I'm far smaller than these other much bigger channels. And to be fair, I'm sure that they have better things to do with their days. I mean, they have to make their own content, and a lot of them have their own jobs and other tasks on the side and everything. But so it's nice to know sometimes when you get a comment from someone who has a much larger channel, one that you subscribe to, that you realize, regardless of the content of the comment, which content was great, but then you realize, oh, so some of these people are watching my content, even if it's just every once in a while. So I really appreciate that. J.K. Lowell, if your voice is as smooth as sandpaper, I recommend some vodka. That will smooth that right out. That will definitely make, if it doesn't make your voice sound better to others, it'll make it sound better to you. Or maybe you just won't give a shit. And that's either way. It's just better if you just have lots of vodka. And it, one way or another, you will feel like your voice is getting better. Take my word on this. Okay, so with that being said, having done my little kind of back patting about the comment I got there from Mr. Deity, I did promise that we're going to get into some comments that are not just people giving me attaboys, although we'll get into some other ones of those too. But I wanted to bring up some other comments here from people that were critical or just weird. So that's what this next comment is going to be. So I hope you guys will enjoy this one. So this is from Krishnan Tampi or Tampi. He is, I believe, in India. It is really cool. I have to say, first of all, before I get into this comment, it's really kind of wild. If you have ever done any type of publishing of content online, whether it's videos or, you know, blog posts or whatever, it is really wild. Like, I don't want to sound like I'm full of myself, although, you know, I'm an arrogant bastard, but it is kind of cool to think that not only are you putting up videos that are getting at least some level of views, but then when you realize that there's people around the world, literally, I've had comments from people in China and Japan and Serbia and Sweden and Norway and, you know, I mean, just all over the place. And it's just kind of crazy to think about this world that we live in now, that even if you have a small channel and, you know, you don't have that much influence, you can still have an audience that is absolutely international. So, yes, this individual here is from India. And yes, Grumpy, not a single period. I'm not going to read through all of this because, well, it's a mouthful to try to actually read through this, in detail, especially because, like you said, Krishnan appears to be allergic to punctuation. But I try to be nice about those types of things. I didn't pull up this comment because I wanted to rag on the person's diction or lack of grammar with regards to punctuation or word choice or what have you, because again, it's international, and I do appreciate the fact that there's someone literally on the other side of the world watching my content and interested enough in it to comment. And most of their comments, most of Christian's comments are at least aligned with me. I mean, it's not like this is some Christian who's telling me that everything I'm doing is stupid. But I'd like to not focus, if I can, on diction and grammar and punctuation and all of that, because even if you're in America, even if you're an English speaker like me, sometimes you're writing this stuff on the subway or you're sitting on the can, you're pushing stuff out as fast as you can with your thumbs. And I understand that sometimes people don't write their comments in the easiest to read manner. But that being said, Christian has put a bunch of comments on my stuff, most of which are interesting. I wanted to highlight this one though, because it says, good video chat, but sorry to say that abortions are the crucifixion of the unborn. Okay, so first of all, I can appreciate that if you're pro-life. I have not actually said much at all about abortion on my channel, and like so many issues that are biblical yet political, I tend to pick and choose when I'm going to say something about this. I'm sure that in the future I will have videos where I speak in much more detail about my thoughts on abortion. And it's not that I'm afraid to give you my thoughts. It's just that when we talk about something like abortion, I want to make sure that I come locked and loaded. I want to make sure that I have all of my details and my position properly illuminated, so that at least, even if you don't agree with it, at least I can feel confident about what I've said. Whether we're talking about biblical basis, whether we're talking about modern politics, all of that. But that being said, even though I'm not going to dive deep into the abortion issue here, anytime someone says something to me like, abortions are the crucifixion of the unborn, I'm sorry. I don't care if you're not a native English speaker. I don't care if you're pro-life, which is fine. Like, again, in the context of this video, I'm not even going to go down that road. But if you're going to tell me that abortion is the crucifixion of the unborn, I'm going to get into definitions with you here, okay? Because crucifixion was a public execution. I don't remember the last time that anyone who ever had an abortion took their live fetus, removed it, and had it nailed to a cross and waited for it to slowly die in full view of others. It was public execution. It was an execution form which was mostly reserved for people who were rebels of the state. I mean, there were other things that could get you executed, but they weren't, in general, crucifying thieves in the marketplace, per se. They were crucifying people that they wanted to make an example of, because they wanted everyone to see that you don't rebel against Rome. And that was one of the primary purposes, or one of the primary motivations for crucifying someone, because it was considered to be humiliating. It was certainly considered to be excruciating, horribly painful, a horrible way to die, long, suffering, drawn out. And even after you're dead, your body's up there as a symbol to everyone that you don't fuck with Rome, right? That's what a crucifixion was. So regardless of your views about abortion, don't tell me that it's the crucifixion of the unborn. Don't tell me that it's the execution even of the unborn, because an execution is even I can, split hairs on that. But even if you wanted to say execution, don't tell me that it's the crucifixion of the unborn. That is a very, very poor choice of words. And I felt like I just had to, at a minimum, call that out. I'm not going to go through all of his comment, but we'll parse through it as we can. Because again, like I said, it takes a little bit to figure out the lack of punctuation here. But it says, it's not morals, but common sense that forced abortions is denying a life that is the embryonic stage, is murder of human being, but built-in law enforcement officers of various countries do it because they consider it so that they want to escape the sense of shame. Okay. Again, this is hard to parse, but I wanted to bring this up because even though it's a little choppy, couple things that I wanted to bring up here. This idea that it's common sense that forced abortions is denying a life that is the embryonic stage. Well, this gets into the classic argument of, I don't like to talk about abortion in regard to life because your skin cells are alive, and no one thinks that I shouldn't be able to scrape off skin cells, even live skin cells if I wanted to. If you're Catholic, the most hardcore devout Catholic, they go so far as to say the egg and the sperm are life and that it can't be wasted. They don't call it murder. I think that if you jack off into a towel or something, but they do talk about wasting your seed. And my point about this is, again, there's a whole bunch of avenues that we could go down, and I don't want to go down all the avenues tonight. But the definition of life is so expansive that if we were to say that you literally cannot deny a life, of any type, then that gets patently absurd very quickly. I truly believe that when it comes to discussions about abortion, whether we're talking about it biblically, whether we are talking about it biblically or just talking about it in terms of modern laws and mores, abortion really, to me, the critical question is one of personhood. Because again, if we want to talk about life, I could make an argument for you that spermatozoa is life, that an egg is life. But I'm not going to get into, yes, orthography. Thank you, positivity. But I'm not going to get into, those ridiculously small, finite distinctions of single cell life and what, whether or not it can live on its own or whether it's alive because it's attached to a broader organism, etc. And other than meeting an egg, sperm won't be life for long. And they're either going to fertilize an egg, or pretty soon they're going to die. They either get reabsorbed back into you, or they get spent in other ways. And we all know that with female anatomy, that eggs themselves, while a woman has her eggs throughout her entire life from the time she's born, once each one gets shot, it's either fertilized or expelled. The point of going down that, I'm going down rabbit holes I don't want to go down, but the point is that, to me, what's more important is, where does personhood begin? And personhood here, I'm not going to try to answer it for you here, but I'm saying that this, to me, is the conversation that people in general, especially Christians in this country, in the United States, don't have often enough. Because I think every sane person understands that, hours before you give birth, that person inside you truly is a person. It's a person in every legal and moral sense. I do know there's some people that believe that at the point of conception, when the sperm fertilizes the egg, that's a person. I personally think that's a ridiculous position to take, but not here to make a long case in this video about trying to shout you down in that regard. But to me, if we want to talk about morals and common sense, it's a question of personhood. Because again, I can take living cells in my body right now and kill them, and nobody is going to say that I have snuffed out a life. Because when we say you've snuffed out a life, what you're really talking about is that you snuffed out something that should qualify as having personhood. And there are a lot of details that are given in, well, it's not talked about a lot in the Bible, but if you watch Dan McClellan's videos, he does a really good job of breaking down the different ways that this is referred to in the Bible, and the different ways that it's referred to from a historical perspective too, because there's like a Greek, there's a way that the Greeks tended to look at this. There's a way that the ancient Hebrews tended to look at it. Like the ancient Hebrews tended to look at it as your first breath, the breath of life. And they talked about this from like the breath of life from God, but they also talked about it like the first breath that you took meant that you were a person. Now, again, if we took that to its nth degree, you could say that the baby who's a week away from being born is not yet a person. And I don't think that most modern people would agree with that idea, even if they're pro-choice. But on the other end of the spectrum, I think that there's a lot of people, even caring people who love children, who would say that they don't think that as soon as a sperm fertilizes an egg, that you now have personhood in the womb of the mother. So I'm going to leave that alone. I'm not going to spend any more time on this because Krishnan, love you, man, but some punctuation would really help. But also, I don't want to go down a 30-minute rabbit hole talking about abortion tonight. It's not even, if I had done a video recently diving into this in depth, maybe we would be talking about it more on this video. But since that's not really the crux of anything that I have been discussing recently on my videos, I'm just going to say what I've said from Krishnan's comment, and we will move on. Okay, taking a look here. We're going to get into some spicier comments here. So let's get into something even more fun, in my humble opinion. Give me just a second. Oh, this is good. This is hilarious. I love this one. Oh, you guys are going to have fun with this. So you guys might have seen that a few days ago, I put out this reaction video to a guy talking about atheist debate me bros. I thought it was kind of fun to go through his video. It wasn't like, I didn't take it as a contentious thing. It was more like an over the top fun thing. But this comment just stunned me with the stupid. Sometimes, there's unintelligent, you're a little off the mark, and then there's sometimes like the stupid just smacks you in the face. Like a big board that's got stupid on it. It's like, wham, so much stupid, all the stupid. So this person here, Ryla Audio, says, I'm realizing that some atheists don't understand that evolution and ideas of non-creationism are the foundation of atheism, not Christianity. It's not unusual or radical for Christians to oppose these beliefs. There's just so much stupid in this. So much stupid. First of all, you'll see below, and I don't always go through the train of comments on these, but you'll see I just said facepalm, and this other person says, oof, you realize atheism predates the theory of evolution by centuries, yes? Because, and of course, the clear intention of this comment is that if you're telling me that evolution and the ideas of non-creationism are the foundation of atheism, then those ideas would need to be in place before there was atheism. You cannot create atheism on a foundation if the ideas for that foundation didn't even exist. Of course, we all know that the understanding of evolution didn't even arise until a few centuries ago. But atheism has been around a hell of a lot longer than that. So how are you going to tell me that evolution and ideas of non-creationism are the foundation of atheism? Now, I do understand that if we took evolution out of this sentence, right? This is still erroneous. But you could kind of sort of make a point and say, well, for people who don't believe in creationism, meaning implying that they don't believe the Bible is true and real, well, then that's the foundation of atheism. But even that would be wrong. Even that would be deeply, stupidly, massively incorrect and wrong. And here's why. Because this idea of biblical literalism, this fundamentalist movement, is not an ancient movement. It's not like 2,000 years ago, right after the death of Christ, people were walking around reading all the scriptures or talking about what they knew of the scriptures and saying, yes, every single word is literal truth. And if you don't believe me, Just look at the Catholic Church, which is the largest segment of Christianity in the entire world. Now, I'm not saying that there are no Christians who believe in literal aspects of the Bible. By definition, you kind of need to at least believe some literal aspects of the Bible to be a Christian, right? Because you have to believe that Yahweh's there. He's a thing. You have to believe that he had a son who came down to earth and died for our sins, yada, yada, right? You have to believe that he was resurrected. But there are many Christians many Catholics, I should say, who believe that the majority of the Bible, especially the old parts of the Bible, the Old Testament, are heavily metaphorical. And there are, for that matter, many Protestants who believe the same thing. So I get kind of called out for this on my videos sometimes because people, even Protestant Christians, will say, we're not all fundamentalists, right? We're not all literalists. And I do know this. I think a lot of times I talk to the fundamentalist set because that to me is one of the most dangerous aspects of Christianity in this country and maybe even across the world, but especially here in the United States. Do I overrepresent them in my videos? Yeah, probably, because I'm usually talking to the percentage or in a proportion that I perceive to be to the perceived threat. But you don't have to believe that creationism isn't a thing in order to be a Christian. And of course, in that light, there's many other variants that you can hold to. So like I was a Christian for 40 years. When I was a Christian, I believed that in some ancient metaphorical sense, God created the heavens and the earth. I believed that God created the universe, but I believed in the Big Bang. I believed in evolution because to me, it's like, well, okay, even if we assume the Big Bang, the way that I talked through this when I was a Christian was, well, but something created the Big Bang, right? That something made the Big Bang happen. Well, how do you know that's not God? So that didn't feel like a contradiction to me at all. And in fact, if you read Genesis through a certain liberal light, you can say like, oh, it kind of feels like this idea of creation and this idea of evolution and this idea of the universe forming under the hands of this omnipotent, omniscient God. I'm not trying to bore you all with my ideas of Christianity when I was a Christian, but I'm bringing this up to point out how epically stupid this statement is from this person. Now granted, it says it's not unusual or radical for Christians to oppose these beliefs. I mean, in the United States, I would say it's not unusual because in the United States, a third of the damn country doesn't believe in evolution, which is so fucking sad. So at least in this country, yeah, it's not unusual. Is it radical? I mean, I guess, how do we want to define radical? I mean, within the Christian fundamentalists cults, I suppose that it's not radical at all. They see it as being de rigueur. Ken Ham and Kent Hovind and all these other idiots, they think that this is just natural. So they don't see it as radical at all. But for anyone who actually understands truth, meaning not spiritual truth, but I mean facts. I shouldn't use that word truth because it gets twisted so often. For people who understand empirical evidence, they understand that it's very radical for you to hold to this bullshit, A few more thoughts on this. Then this person goes on to say that atheism is believed to have first cropped up around the year 5 BC in India, which I didn't even bother trying to Google this. I don't know where they got this, but that's absolutely fucking ridiculous. That's the dumbest statement and the most ethnocentric statement I could ever think of. Because by ethnocentric, I don't mean in terms of your ethnicity, but I mean, I should say it's the most theocentric statement you could come up with. Because if you don't think that there were atheists around before 5 BC, and if you think that they only cropped up in India, then you really don't understand anything about the state of indoctrination and religion and how religion is indoctrinated into every generation after generation, going back for millennia. And in society after society across this world, and this correlates very highly with us settling down from our hunter-gatherer roots into cities and settlements, we then seemed to glom onto this idea of this organized theistic religion. And once that happened, this was the identity marker. This was how you knew that they're one of us or they're not one of us, whether or not they're the in crowd, whether we can trust them. So it's kind of silly to me to think that you would at any point try to tell me when atheism cropped up, because the simple fact is we don't know when atheism cropped up, because you could go back to some village. Let's say you went back to the early days of Jericho, 1400 BCE. And I'm sure that if you asked everyone in the village of Jericho if they believed in God, they'd all say yes. You know why? Because their damn life depended on it. Because you didn't sit there and say you're an atheist. Everybody said that they believed in Yahweh, or they believed in whoever the God was that they were worshiping at the time. So it's so myopic and ignorant to even assume that you can say when or where atheism ever popped up, because for most of our written history, to be an atheist was something that you needed to keep on the down low. You know, you didn't want to advertise that shit. It really wasn't until like the Enlightenment that you had in some cultures, in some countries, in some, localities, some people who felt comfortable actually identifying as either atheist or deist, which is not atheist at all, but at least it's very different from traditional Christianity, or any other type of aberrant type of religious ideas. By aberrant, I just mean compared to the social norm, because otherwise you could put yourself in deep jeopardy. And even during the Enlightenment, who was it that was speaking up about these things? It was the rich folk. You had people like Voltaire. Voltaire wasn't poor. Voltaire wasn't worried about his next meal. In other words, he was somewhat insulated because he had the means to be able to speak his mind. And at least we had advanced to a point, if you want to call it that, where he didn't have to feel like he was going to be burned at the stake for his beliefs. Okay. Alexander says, people, Adam, they look to put you down with controversial questions. That's very true. So he gives this long reply. I'm not even going to go through all of it, but we'll move on to the next one. But I thought that you guys would enjoy the effery of someone telling us that believing in evolution is the foundation of atheism, because you can't be atheist without believing in evolution, according to this patent idiot. But hey, let's drink to stupid, shall we? And then move on to our next joyful statement, or comment, I should say. This next one is from someone who sometimes I don't know if they're trolling me or what. And if they are, that's fine. It's all content. But this is on my Godfrey Bible Study episode about a Joshua 11-18. And signs are here. I know I've spoken about signs are here in other God's Troll Army episodes, but they say it is also written that Satan, and I was talking in the video about how how you're going to believe this shit, and you're supposed to believe that Satan, that he had his talking snake, and he says it's also written that Satan went into Judas. So Satan went into a human being. How can he not go into a snake? Now, I wanted to highlight this, and I'm going to go through some of the little back and forth in the replies, but I wanted to highlight this because this is a classic Christian approach to handling anything about the Bible, any challenge to the Bible, that they can't just point to the text and say, no, you're wrong. So I was talking about the fact that there is no evidence anywhere that says that the serpent in Genesis was Satan. I mean, it's referred to later in Revelation, but nobody in ancient Hebrew times ever thought that that was Satan. And even after they started to create this idea of Satan, because that's exactly what they did. They created Satan over time, because Satan starts off as the Satan, which is the accuser. It's more like a legalistic term. But even once they started to evolve this idea of Satan, then what they did is, some people started trying to go back and find evidence of Satan. This wasn't the Jews, by the way. You'd be hard pressed to find a Jew who will tell you that the serpent in the Garden of Eden was Satan. There are some modern, very liberal Jews that are more Christian than Jew that they might tell you that. But, for any hardcore Jew, they're not going to tell you that. But here's my central point though, that when you say to them, there's nothing in the text that even hints to the idea that this is Satan. It just says it's a serpent. It's a talking serpent. And then you get back lines like this bullshit. They're saying, well, he went into Judas. So if he can go into a human being, how could he not go into a snake? Okay, so in other words, you have come up with a scenario in your mind that you can use to make you feel good about the fact that the text doesn't say what you want it to say. So as long as you can come up with a fairy tale that is sufficient to ease your anxiety over your bullshit religion, you will then use that fairy tale to justify the story, even though none of that is in the text, even though it doesn't say that anywhere in the text. But as long as you can come up with some machination that allows you to figure out how this could be true, you then will tell everyone who cares to listen that it is true. This is, and Dan McClellan talks about this a lot. This is how Christians routinely address contradictions in the Bible. So they will take contradiction where this chapter says X, this chapter says Y. And if they can come up with any story that explains how we got from X to Y, then they will tell you that it's not a contradiction, even though it's a plain contradiction in the text. But this is how Christians die on this hill, trying to tell you that there's no contradictions in the Bible. So an analogy I would give you for this, I'm a writer. So let's say that in chapter 1, I tell you that our protagonist, Joey, has blue hair. And then chapter 2, which seems to be just a simple chronological march from chapter 1 to chapter 2, there's no clear time difference between chapter 1 and chapter 2. In chapter 1, I said that Joey had blue hair. In chapter 2, I say that he has green hair, with no explanation between chapter 1 and chapter 2 how his hair went from blue to green. Now, you could argue that between the events of chapter 1 and chapter 2, Joey grabbed a bottle of dye and dyed his hair from blue to green because he got tired of the blue and he said, now I want it to be green. And in theory, that's not wrong. Sure, that could be an explanation, but if it's not in the text, it's still a contradiction. See, you can have a contradiction that after further analysis, you think you know what actually happened in the story, okay? That doesn't mean that the contradiction goes away. It just means that you have come up with a way to synthesize it in your mind so that it makes sense to you. And that's fine. I'm not saying that it's wrong to do that. But where it gets wrong is that when you come back to the person who's pointing out the contradiction and you want to shout them down and tell them, no, it's not a contradiction at all. See, I don't care if his hair was blue in chapter 1 and it was green in chapter 2. It's not a contradiction because he could have dyed his hair. But until the author actually tells you that he dyed his hair between chapter 1 and chapter 2, guess what? It's a fucking contradiction. It's still a contradiction. It may be a contradiction that you can explain. It may be a contradiction that doesn't invalidate the rest of the book or the rest of the text, but that doesn't change the fact that it's still a contradiction. And this kind of stuff happens all the time, because you'll have someone like this who will say, well, if Satan went into Judas, then he could totally go into a snake. Yeah, I guess by that logic, if we're working in la la land and you want to believe that your Satan is out there jumping into creatures, then yes, he went into Judas, and yes, he could have gone into the snake, but you are completely making that shit up. You have no basis for it in the text. You are making stuff up to make yourself feel better about your book that doesn't, on its face, make sense. There were a couple other. So you'll see, I said, yeah, I'm talking about Satan here. I said, I assume he can go anywhere, but that's not in the story. Just keep making stuff up to make yourself feel better. And then, we just get more of this. Then you do get more of the generic preaching something. Like, it's not even an answer. It's not even addressing what I just told them. So then finally, this is one of the last things I said. So, because he's still sticking with this logic that if Satan can jump into Judas, then that somehow verifies the idea that Satan was the serpent. So I said, under this logic, I can also tell you that Abraham was Satan. And there's no way for you to refute it, because sure, the text does not tell you that Satan was in Abraham, but it doesn't tell you that he wasn't. I mean, I could argue that Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Moses and all of them were Satan. They were all possessed by Satan. And you can't prove me wrong under this logic, because, hey, we've moved away from the idea of what the text says. And now you're just coming up with any story that we can make up. And as long as you're going to make up your own story that says that the serpent was Satan, then I can make up a story that says that Abraham was Satan, and Jacob was Satan, and Isaiah was Satan, and all of the patriarchs of the Bible, they were all Satan. You can't prove me wrong, so deal with it. Oh, so anyway, let's move on to the next comment. Actually, as we move on to the next comment, I also need to refresh my drink. Once again, my unpaid sponsors for the show are Pinnacle Whipped Vodka. They have paid me $0 for this spot. But hey, I'm a nice guy, so I'm giving them all the attention that they didn't even pay me for. Because I'm a pretty nice guy. And you should always have your whipped vodka with root beer. Yummy shit. Cheers to Christian fuckery. As long as Satan's serpent didn't enter Judas. I have to give you credit for that, and I also have to say I'm really feeling ashamed that I did not come up with that myself. So I'm really kind of upset that I didn't already come up with that. So kudos to you. Yeah. As long as Satan's serpent didn't enter Judas, that's a good call there, because that would definitely not make Christians happy. Okay, let's see more angry shit, shall we? I love angry shit. Okay, so I did this video. This is like the first month that I had the channel up. And this is someone who apparently just found the video recently. So they decided that basically, it's funny because I just, this morning, put out a video about prayer. If some of you might have seen it, talking about basically how prayer is a big steaming pile of horseshit, and it doesn't do anything. And when it doesn't do anything, it's your fault. It's all your fault. You stupid Christian. It's all your fault. You're not doing it right. Well, I did a video kind of along those same lines. I mean, anytime I talk about prayer, it's going to be a common theme, folks. I'll tell you every single time, because every time we talk about prayer, especially in Christianity, it's always the same story. It's that you're not doing it right, and don't worry, he's going to answer it eventually, and God always answers prayers, and blah, 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 blah. But we all know that's some hot buttered bullshit right there. Hot steaming butter bullshit. Yep. In this video I did back in, I think it was June, may have been July. I think it was June of last year. Was going through some of the same notes. And this person comes in and says, "You clearly don't even know the meaning of God has a plan for everyone. You clearly don't understand the fucking point." If I'm supposed to be able to pray to God, then telling me God has a plan for everyone means absolutely nothing. So God has a plan for everyone. What does that have to do with the fact that my prayers aren't getting answered? Oh, that's right. It has nothing to do with it. Nothing whatsoever. And one of the saddest dodges is, well, God's got a plan. Oh, so that's why he's not answering any of this shit. And by the way, if God has a plan for everyone, and which basically invalidates any prayers that I'm going to put up, then why pray in the first place? Because he's got his own plan. He's got his own plan. So, like, why am I going to pray? That's just utterly fucking stupid. And of course, he doubles down on the ignorance. And since, there was no respect in this, he says, "You clearly don't know the meaning of God has a plan for everyone." So I said, "You're clearly a psychopath." And of course, he says, "Atheists love projection. You just proved my point of not understanding it, by the way." How is this proving his point of not understanding it? In other words, unless you just shut up and go along with my magic, silent Christian sky daddy, then you just don't understand it. This is the ultimate in pointing the blame right back on you. Because if you think that your prayers aren't getting answered, you're just too stupid. You don't understand. See, God is mysterious. He's mysterious. Who could know his ways? It's impossible to know his ways. And you are so stupid and lowly and petty, you can't possibly hope to understand any of this. Unless, of course, you're a good Christian, which means you still don't understand it. But at least then you know how to spit back the words and say, "Well, no, it's okay because God has a plan. God has a plan." So then I just said, "You're so epic. What a warrior for Christ you are." And he says, now granted, this is, petty, right? Because I'm just like, you're just an asshole. So I'm not saying that this was, great commentary on my part. But then he says, "And what a warrior for science you are too." The video was entirely about prayer. It was entirely about prayer. Okay. So this is all the more reason why I wanted to highlight this comment tonight, because I thought that this is just classic Christian fuckery right here. So I pointed out this video has nothing to do with science, but I wouldn't expect you to understand that. And he says, "Atheists believe science was the reason the universe exists. So it clearly does have something to do with it." Okay, first of all, science is a man-made methodology, you fucking dimwit. So if you think that atheists believe science was the reason that the universe exists, what you are saying is that atheists believe that a man-made methodology was the reason that the universe exists. Now, I've met a number of atheists in my life in person. Of course, I've run across many of them on YouTube. I have yet to meet a single atheist who actually believes that it was a man-made methodology that created or is the reason that the universe exists. Because that would pretty clearly imply that men or, humanity existed before the universe. I don't think anyone's making that argument. I don't play video games no more. I don't think anyone is that stupid except for people like you who comment on these videos. And even I know what he's trying to say. He doesn't have the ability to use his words really good. He doesn't know how to put the syllables in place, and he doesn't know how to do the grammars and shit. So he has to try to work out the keys as best he can with his feeble mind. So what he's really trying to imply here is that atheists believe that empirical naturalistic processes brought about the universe, but he doesn't know how to articulate that or type that out in a way that's anything better than a first grade level. So he just says atheists believe science was the reason that the universe exists, because that's the only way that he can articulate it. Even then, even when we grant him that, he says, so it clearly does have something to do with it. No, still has nothing to do with the video. The video is about prayer. The video is about how your all-loving, omnipotent, omniscient, perfectly just God can't be bothered to answer a single fucking prayer other than somebody making shit up. There is literally not a single shred of evidence that anyone can bring up that ever says, oh, look, God answered my prayer, other than what they make up. That's what the video is about. It has nothing to do with the creation of the universe. It has nothing to do with what role science plays or what role atheist ideologies play in the creation of the universe. But you really can't function on an intellectual level, so you have to throw your little pedantic barbs. So that's cool. It must be fun to be 4. I've forgotten what it was like. Yum, yum, yum. Let's move on to the next comment, shall we? This person is so nice as to point out what I don't understand. A few weeks ago, you guys may have seen the couple of videos that I did on Matthew 5, explaining why essentially every Christian that you've ever met is a goddamn hypocrite. Because Matthew 5, starting from verse 17 onward, is essentially clear as day that you are supposed to follow all of the old laws. And this is your God man, your little Jesus bro, of supposedly, according to the book, telling you this. These are direct quotes from your magic God boy. And he is telling you to follow all of the old laws. But of course, Christians are never, ever, 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 ever going to do that. Now, are they? Because Christians like bacon. And I don't blame them, because bacon is fucking delicious. But they're hypocrites. They're all hypocrites because they want to pick the verses from the Old Testament that they want to throw at you, but they don't want to have to follow most of that shit because that shit's archaic and it's bullshit. So this was the follow-up video, because I did one video and then I did another video where I said, you know, in the last couple days I've been looking at this, and the more I look at it, I'm really kind of seeing something in the text that I hadn't seen before. So, of course, this dumbass says, please stop thinking 48 hours is enough to topple Christendom. As though I just read Matthew 5 for the first time 2 weeks ago, and then I spent 48 more hours thinking about it, and then came up with this video. Now, I realize this, asshat probably never looked at anything else on my channel. And granted, like on God-Free Bible Study, I'm not in the New Testament yet, but if anyone has spent even 20 minutes going through some of my other videos, you realize that you may not like my takes on the Bible, but to assume that all I've done is ruminate on it for 48 hours, and now I think I'm going to topple Christendom, it's because you're a fucking idiot. That's all there is to it. You're just not paying attention. So it's just the kind of snark that you would expect from anyone when you point out to them in their own text why they are being a hypocrite. Notice, just like so many of these content or comments, he can't engage with a single point that I brought up. And this is a common theme anytime on videos like mine, okay? Because I see this on other channels as well. I've seen this like on Mindshift, for example, where he will go through the comments that come in from angry Christians. And time again, it's always the same thing, that the people who are the angriest and think they're throwing the best zingers at you, they literally cannot engage with a single point from the video. I could be snarky and say that they're incapable of engaging with a single point from the video. But if I'm being as charitable as I can be, it's just because they can't even be bothered to engage, because you're not agreeing with what preacher man told them. You're not agreeing with what their Sunday school teacher taught them 40 years ago. So you are bad. You're bad. You're a bad man. And everything you say is bad. And that's all they have to think about it. See, that's the extent to which they have to engage the issue. They go, this doesn't agree with my preacher man. I don't have to think about that anymore. And then they can go off and they can flaunt, keep screwing those two words up. They can flaunt every rule in the Bible and they can feel good about it because their preacher man told them that it's okay. It's okay. And every once in a while, if they're feeling froggy, they'll get on YouTube and they'll put in some snarky, stupid comment because you have to set me in my place, right? You have to teach me a lesson because, when you see a comment like this, wow, that really made me question everything I'm doing. I guess I'll just shut down the channel because he really set me in my place now, didn't he? I also love that, someone else put here, your analysis is as bad as a child's. Perhaps illiterate would be a step up for you. So he must have, then he had to double down. Notice, he still can't be bothered to tell me what it is about my analysis that is bad at all. I mean, screw being as bad as a child's. He can't even tell me how a single point that I've brought up is in any way erroneous, because he doesn't have the mental capacity to actually spell that out. All he can do is tell you, this is what my preacher told me. My preacher said I can eat my bacon, so I'm good. And that's all he can do. He's like a pull string, oh, you don't know the Bible. You don't know the verses. You're taking it out of context. He probably has a physical pull string on his back. He's got it on his back, and every time he decides to make a comment on YouTube, he pulls his own pull string, and then it spits out a comment that he can type down. Anywho, I actually know the Bible, and I can read. Yeah, you can. Except you don't actually know how to make any cogent points. So, okay. But anyway, just another absolute idiot who literally through the whole chain can't be bothered to tell you one single point that's erroneous in any way. That's always good sport right there. Moving on. Look at that. Let's see, where am I? Okay. Oh, this is good. This is fun too. Now this one is from one of my regular commenters, and this is definitely not a contentious type of comment. So I don't want, if they watch this, I don't want them to think that I'm busting their balls over this. But I had to bring this up because at one point in this video that they're commenting on, I talked about Satanists and theists and the overlap there on the Venn diagram. And I wanted to bring this up because I've actually seen this type of comment from a number of people over the last 6 months. You see here, it says, Satanists are atheists. Satan's used as a symbol of individualism and personal empowerment, the things Christian churches suppress precisely to make the idea clear. Not understood as an actual entity. That also applies to LaVey's infamous Church of Satan and the new kid on the block, the Satanic Temple. Christians seem to confuse them with Satan worshippers. Excusagists certainly do, probably on purpose. Sure, there are Satan worshippers who call themselves Satanists, but according to the two aforementioned registered religious organizations, they are not. So this is more of just like I'm not necessarily arguing with this commenter here. Like I said, he and I are there. She and I, I'm not sure. We're usually in lockstep. But they themselves say, sure, there are Satan worshipers who call themselves Satanists. Well, if there are Satan worshipers who call themselves Satanists, then a Satanist can be theistic. Now, I I think most of the confusion that comes about here is because, as they point out, the two organizations that we tend to associate with Satanism most frequently are the LaVey's Old Church of Satan, which I think has kind of gone away. I have to look that up, but I mean, I'm sure there's someone out there who says that they're still part of the Church of Satan, but I think it's like 50 people or something. And then there's the Satanic Temple, and neither one of those were or are theistic. They tend to treat Satan, as they're saying here, as a symbol. But I had put in the comments below this too to this person. I said, well, but if somebody worships Satan and believes that Satan is a thing, then is that not a Satanist? So this is just kind of a definitional point, but I just thought I would bring it up because almost any time I bring up Satanism and theism, and if I ever conflate the two, I get a comment down below from someone saying, that Satanists don't believe in Satan. Well, I do know that, especially in America, and especially in these organizations, the average Satanist, I think, does not profess to believe in an actual entity, a deity that we would call Satan. But they exist. Those people exist who think that Satan is real and worship him. So are they not Satanists? I mean, I think they have to be Satanist, right? And you can even Google, like if you look up theistic Satanism, there's a whole Wikipedia page for it. So I think that it is, even amongst Satanists, Satanists are kind of a fringe group in terms of numbers. And even amongst Satanists, I think theistic Satanists are a small sliver thereof. But they can exist. You can be a theistic Satanist. It's a thing. All right, this one here is interesting to me. Let me give me a second here. I want to see. Okay, I was just looking at making sure. So every once in a while, it's good to look at the dashboard and make sure I'm still connected. Because sometimes you can talk for 20 minutes and realize something happened to the connection. So every once in a while, it's good to check and go, yep, it's still a live stream. There's still something going on there. So forgive me for that. But this one here, I don't know if they're trolling me or not. You have to, you guys got to, for those who are watching now, I want your judgment as to whether or not this is trolling me, because this is someone who normally pretty much agrees with me, I think. But I wasn't sure, because on my science threatens identity thing here, Reality Wizard, who, I've gotten a lot of comments from Reality Wizard, and I think I normally agree with them. This is NASA isn't always honest. I've seen an episode where they are clearly not on the space station, but they are pretending to be and joking about it. People and corporations lie. Okay, so you're telling me that there was an episode where, one, they were clearly not on the space station, but you're telling me that they're pretending and they're joking about it. And then you're telling me that people and corporations lie. I mean, of course, in general, people and corporations do lie. That's that last sentence. Okay, fine. People and corporations lie. That's unquestionable. But I wasn't sure if this was meant as a joke. Haha, NASA had a show where they were pretending to be on a space station, so we know they were lying. Or did they think that they were making a point? Because you're telling me that they're pretending and they're joking about it. And then you're telling me, see, they lie. Yeah, because they were pretending and they were joking about it. If I pulled up my green screen right now and I put a moonscape behind me, right? And then I laughed about how, haha, I'm live streaming today from the moon. Would you then use that as a basis to say, well, Skepticus lies? I mean, I saw a video where he was clearly pretending to be on the moon and it was not, and he was laughing about it, so he lies. I don't know if we have the right definitions, the right terms, if we would agree on what lying really is in this context, especially when you say that they were pretending and they were joking about it. So, granted, Reality Wizard, if you see this and I just didn't understand that you were just kind of making a haha joke, that's fine. Because like I say, I think I agree more often than not on Reality Wizard's comments. But this would just make me go like, what are you trying to say? I don't understand it. Yeah, I think he was watching an episode of SpongeBob. Oh, that's good. That could be. You know, was he watching? What was it? NASA pretending to be in space, or was it Bikini Bottom? That could be too, because Bikini Bottom kind of looks like space if you think a little bit. You know, like it's got a blue background, but it kind of looks like a space, you know, like foreign landscape kind of thing. So maybe it might be that he was watching SpongeBob. That's a good point. I hadn't thought about that. So that could be true. Okay, let's move on to the next one, shall we? While I continue to funnel down more of the yummy vodkas. Okay, this one was weird. So, a lot of you probably saw, because it's gotten, by my standards, it's gotten good viewership. The takedown I did of Glenn Scrivener, who was trying to counter Dan McClellan, and was making an absolute fucking ass out of himself. Oh my gosh, he just made himself look stupid. As a side note, before I get into this comment, like I never thought that Glenn Scrivener was some genius guy, but I thought he seemed like a fairly intelligent, fairly well-intentioned apologist, if that's not a complete contradiction in terms. But, you know, I didn't see him as being just a complete asshat. But when I saw this video from him, I thought, wow, it's not just that I don't agree with your points. It's like you literally don't know the words that you're talking about. He just kept showing everybody how uninformed he was, and it was honestly kind of stunning to me. So I definitely felt like I had to do that reaction video. But this Barton Bagnus, that's probably not how you pronounce that, but Barton says the Bible is definitely not univocal. There are many contradictions in it. Okay, I'm with you. Good going. In John, it says no one has seen God at any time, yet the Old Testament has many people seeing God. I'm glad that he brought this up, because in the video, Glenn Scrivener, like so many other apologists, talks this crap about how, you know, you can't see God. And I didn't even bother going into that because there was too much other juicy stuff to dive into in this video. But yes, that's a complete contradiction. Trinitarians say that was Jesus Christ the Son, not the Father they saw. The Son, who is the same substance and essence as the Father, yet one can be seen while the other can't. Absolutely. It makes no sense whatsoever. So I'm with you, Barton. Let's continue with your comment. I'm sure it's going to get better. Or not. But then it says, but I could never be an atheist. It requires too much faith in the impossible. Okay. Not only does fine-tuning put the chance of the universe coming into existence spontaneously as it is, the only way it could be to support life, at 1 times 10 to the 2,865,000th power, as good as 0 without outside influence. Okay. Anytime you hear someone throwing around these ridiculous fucking numbers, you know that this is someone in the Discovery Institute or Answers in Genesis Venn diagram. These are people who are getting these ridiculous made up numbers. And if you Google this kind of stuff, you can find these exact same numbers, because Answers in Genesis and Discovery Institute have unfortunately done a very good job of popularizing these numbers. Like it's checkmate, atheists, checkmate evolutionists, you know, like they think that this is so stunning when in fact, if you look at how they came up with these numbers, it's complete absolute conjecture. They have made them up out of whole cloth. But we'll continue on because you know, these people, they think that this just proves that, you know, atheism, that's ridiculous. Look at this crazy number I got off a website that I don't understand. In other words, it would never happen. But that also would require breaking all the laws of physics. Newton's first law states that an object at rest stays at rest unless acted upon by an outside force. Motion cannot happen spontaneously. An outside force is needed to start the first motion, the exact motion that would lead to the universe as it is. That force would have to have self-movement and the ability to move other things. For that force to have self-movement requires it to have consciousness and intelligence. What? Oh gosh. The stupid. It burns. Oh, it burns. Sufficient intelligence to start the exact motion that would lead to the universe as it is, as well as enough intelligence to have foresight to know exactly what motion would lead to the universe we have now. Even if we accepted this ridiculous BS, okay? How do you know that you would have to have foresight to know what you were creating? I've brought this up, not in videos, but you know, when I've had discussions with people. I'm a computer programmer. I can create a simulation. It won't be as detailed as the universe, but I can create a simulation, right? I can set variables for, you know, matter, and I can set variables for people, and I can set variables for all kinds of stuff, and I can hit go. And I can say, boom, do the simulation. Now the simulation might fail. It might end up in a virtual universe that doesn't have anything in it, or it might have end up with a virtual universe that doesn't have anything living in it. You know, I mean, there are a million different ways that you could set up a simulation. You don't have to have foresight. In fact, that's one of the reasons why you do simulations, because sometimes you want to know what happens if I do this lever, what happens if I push this button. You know, let me change the variables a little bit and see what comes out. Now, I'm not saying that this is what's happening in our universe, because that does still imply someone who's running the simulation, right? Although I do find that idea of a creator as being at least more amenable with the observations that we make in nature than saying, poof, the magic Sky Daddy did it with perfect foreknowledge. I mean, that's just stupid, and it's a complete non sequitur. It makes no sense. Then he says, so that self-conscious, independent, moving, all-knowing force describes a god or gods, for there could be more than one force working together as one god, those separate beings. Ultimately, I mean, I don't care. You know, this person can have whatever beliefs that they want, but I think it's funny how, you know, they start off with, you know, basically saying, yeah, you know, the Bible isn't univocal. Okay, that makes sense. And, you know, the Trinity doesn't really make a lot of sense. But I could never be an atheist. And then it just kind of devolves into all of these answers in Genesis talking points. It's all of these Ken Ham, you know, Frank Turek talking points. It's like they have a cheat sheet or flashcards that they're pulling up to give you all of the same things. You know, like, you know, how many times have we seen this? Oh, you know, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. Okay, dude, but you have enough faith to believe in a magic Sky Daddy that literally just transcends every single law of nature, and that you can't explain in any way whatsoever. You can't explain, you can't prove, you can't even demonstrate to me, but you just have faith in that. But you don't have enough faith to be an atheist. No, that they think, I'll tell you, theists think that is the best zinger. I have seen this now over and over again on these apologist channels. We're like, you know, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. And they all pat each other on the back and they jerk each other off. You know, like, wasn't that great? Man, I really stuck it to them. I said, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. That means nothing. That just means, first of all, that you have no idea what atheism is. And second of all, it means that your brain is this big. It means that you have the processing capacity of a worker ant. That's about it. So and theists will say this like they're bragging about it. Like, You don't realize what a self-own this is when you say this. If the mere fact that you think it takes faith to be an atheist is holding up a big neon sign that says, I don't know how to do the thinks. The thinks are beyond me. But okay, you don't have enough faith to be an atheist. Great. Good on you, Christians. All right, next comment. Some of these others aren't as critical, or some of them are right along with us, but I thought they'd be funny to pull up nonetheless. That one didn't come up. Hold up. Let's try next one here. Why are these not coming up now? Oh, that's why. How did that get unclicked? Okay, let's go back to the first one. So this one was pretty simple, but I still thought it was enjoyable. So you guys may have seen my video this morning talking about 5 reasons that God isn't answering your prayers. And of course, you know, I got several variations on this, but I really liked it. Reasons 1 to 5, God doesn't exist. Christians will give you 1,000 different excuses for why God isn't answering your prayers, always ignoring the massive elephant in the room. I mean, there's this big pink neon elephant right in the room. Like, maybe God isn't there. Have you thought about that? If you tell me that, hey, I've emailed Joe every day now for a year and I haven't gotten a single response from him, well, one answer might be that maybe Joe's dead, or maybe Joe was never there, or maybe you have the wrong email address. I don't know. I mean, these are all simple answers to the question of why doesn't Joe answer my emails? But they never are going to go through those possible answers, because no, they have to work for the assumption that God's there, which really is sad, because it becomes much easier. It becomes much less of a burden on your mind to think about why your prayers aren't. Christians might think like, well, I don't want to even think about what happens if God's not there, because like that sounds terrifying to them. But the flip side is, I say that it makes so much of life easier, because when you insist that God is there, and when you insist that you're supposed to pray to God, and when you insist that at least on some level God is supposed to answer your prayers, then of course, when he doesn't answer your prayers, when the imaginary Sky Daddy does not answer your prayers, then you have to come up with some way to justify why it didn't happen. And that gets more painful than just acknowledging that, oh, maybe he's not there. I think it's more painful, but I guess some people would say it's more painful to just say that God doesn't exist. I don't know. It depends on what you consider to be soothing, I guess. Okay. Same video about 5 reasons God's not answering your prayers. It all comes back to you start out as broken, and in spite of Jesus, you actually never get better. And so in the video, I talked about how it's always your fault. It's always your fault. And I liked this comment because, yeah, I mean, this isn't just about prayer. It's really, to me, this is the value proposition, if you want to call it that, of Christianity. The value proposition is you sucked to begin with, and you still suck, and you're going to keep sucking, but at least at the end of your entire life of suckitude, you get to go to heaven. That's the value proposition. I mean, imagine that I had corporate coaching, you know, like one of these CEO executive coaching practices, right? And I got some client, some bigwig CEO, and he came to me the first day, you know, told me what's going well or not going well in his life. And I just said, you know, you're a crappy CEO. And no matter what I do to work with you over the rest of your life, you're still going to be a crappy CEO. And the best thing that you can hope is that when you're dead, people will start to look at you as maybe not being a crappy CEO. And now pay me a lot of money. Like, That's not a good way to start like a coaching practice, you know? Or if I was like one of these personal trainers and I came to your house and was like, wow, you were really out of shape. You need a lot of work and I'm going to work with you, but at the end of this you're still going to be really out of shape. You're still going to be a worthless piece of shit. You're not going to be able to do much work. You're not going to be able to exercise. You're going to look flabby and fat, and but I'm your personal trainer. And like, that's only in religion is that a sales pitch. Only do religious people take it like, oh, let me sign up for that course. Yeah, that's the personal trainer I want. I want the personal trainer who's going to tell me for the rest of my goddamn life that I'm a loser, that I'm an absolute loser. Oh, Christianity. I got a lot of comments on the prayer one, so this is kind of fun to go through these. So Lisa Van Houten says, maybe God is not answering prayers because he doesn't exist. He's AWOL. He doesn't like you or your prayer, or he's just saying no for no reason. Ooh, I know. He is answering the prayer of some being on another planet instead of you. So, I mean, the obvious theme again is like maybe he's not there, but I also like how Lisa gives other possible answers here, like maybe he doesn't like you. Maybe he didn't like your prayer. Maybe you do a shitty job of praying. Maybe it's not that you're praying for the wrong things, but you just do it badly. Like that's what we should have. I should start a business as a prayer coach. No, work with me. Stay with me. This is this could be lucrative. I could be Adam of Nola, your personal prayer coach. And I'm not going to talk to you about like what are the right things to ask for. I'm not going to, talk about how you have to confess your sins. My whole thing is like, no, you need to be in this position. Like maybe put your legs up a little bit and don't do this. That's old school. Do this instead. And like you should only pray between these hours. Like I'll have like a whole set of parameters that I can train you on. And then every time your prayers aren't answered, I'm still going to tell you, you didn't follow one of the parameters. If you'd have followed all my parameters, you need to like have like a special prayer bib or prayer robe or something that you have to put on, which of course I will sell you. It'll be like a $500 prayer robe. It has to be perfectly clean and dry clean. Like you can't wear the same prayer robe for 2 prayers in a row. You have to have like a fresh one that's been dry cleaned. So you're gonna need a whole closet full of my Adam special prayer robes at $500 a pop. And you're gonna have to be playing special prayer music, which I will also sell you for the low price of like $50 a track. And there will be prayer candles. And whoa, man, the more I think about this, if the channel goes away tomorrow and you wonder what happened, Google like Adam prayer service or something and you'll realize why the channel ended. Because this might be this could be lucrative. I need to have a professional prayer coaching service. Yeah, Christians would eat that shit up. Oh, they would eat that shit up. And you can never be faulted because every time the prayer doesn't work, I'll just say, well, you didn't have the right candle, or your prayer robe wasn't, properly cleaned, or you need a new prayer robe, or you need a new prayer pillow that you can kneel on or something. Like every time a prayer is not answered, my answer will be, here's another thing you need to buy from the Adam prayer site, the prayer store. Oh, I'm going to be rich, people. I'm going to be really rich. This is great. Oh. Okay. Next item. Same video again. So it says the problem with videos like this is that Josh is being arrogant. They're talking about Josh Howerton, this video was a response to Josh Howerton doing a sermon at Lake Point Church in Dallas. Says the problem with videos like this is that Josh is being arrogant. When I was a Christian, people used to ask me why God didn't answer their prayers, and I always gave them the same reply. I don't know. I'm not God. This problem of American Christians always thinking that they have to give an explanation is missing the point of their faith. The whole point of faith is trusting that God has a good reason, and if he deems it necessary, he will provide you that explanation in his own time. It's not your job to figure out the plan, but to simply trust that there is one, even if you can't figure it out. Trying to explain why God does or doesn't do something is saying, well, if I was God, ... Well, sorry to break this to Josh, but he's not trying, but he's not. And trying to be is kind of a no-no in Christianity. So, having been a Christian for 40 years, I agree with all of this. This is not incorrect at all. Even the question of why didn't God answer my prayer is, on some theological level, self-defeating, and you could even say it's an act of hubris. The flip side of this, though, is that while I agree with this from a theological standpoint, knowing what I do about Christianity, the counterpoint of this is then why pray? Then why even bother praying? I mean, I agree with it, but this undercuts the whole point of praying. I mean, there's such an arrogance. We're going to see this in other comments here. There's such an arrogance that comes with prayer, because prayer is saying, I can actually intercede with the omnipotent, omniscient, all-knowing, all-just, creator of the goddamn universe. And I can get him to do something for me that apparently he wasn't going to do anyway. And Christians never stop to think of how goddamn arrogant that sounds. Really. And I don't care how urgent your need is. I don't care if your baby child is dying. I don't care if you have been stricken with a terrible disease. I mean, you can have the worst things happening to you. But even in those scenarios, when you have the worst thing happening to you, still, you are a fucking speck in the universe. You are a speck in the earth, in God's plan. And to think that God supposedly knows everything that's happening and this is all part of his plan, but, in this case, I can get him to change the plan because I just don't like the way things are turning out, is really self-centered. It's so arrogant. And if it worked, it would actually say more bad about Christianity than it not working. Because if it worked, it's like, really? The all-powerful God of the universe is out here answering little one-off requests from Joey and Mary and Bob and Sue. Like this, that's ridiculous. That's not how you run a universe. That makes no sense. But they never see the arrogance of that. They never even think of it in those terms. All right, next comment. Where are we at here? Moving right along. Wait, where'd my notes go? So James basically echoes what I was just saying before. Also noticed on these two videos that I did like 6 months apart that talk about prayer, James basically put the same comment here. Like, does he have these copied and pasted that he just puts into different videos? I don't know. But it says, if God knows the future and he doesn't change his mind, then why would Christians expect him to change his mind billions of times every day? So yeah, the same kind of idea. But now I have to realize, now that I search for that, like, okay, does he have a spreadsheet where he just like copies and pastes these into different videos? He probably does, but okay. Sure. That's kind of hilarious. James has a system, people. Like James is working it. James is absolutely working it. All right, let's look at the next one. I don't like mayo, says, and by the way, I don't like mayo either, so we're already on good terms. This is weird how they never consider that maybe God isn't answering your prayers because he doesn't like you. Maybe he really hates your guts and he's tired of finding your lost car keys all the time. Maybe he's just sick of your shit. Could you imagine? There's some poor person in your congregation and they're crying and they're upset and they've been praying for something, and they come to you like, Pastor, I just don't know. Like I've been praying and praying and it's just not happening. And the pastor says, well, maybe God just doesn't like you. Maybe he's tired of your ass. Have you thought about that? Maybe you should pray. But the new prayer you should say is, God, do you want me to leave you alone? Because I feel like I'm annoying you. Oh, there are so many times I'll tell you, the most dangerous job I could have is like if it was like a Catholic priest, and you're doing confession and you're already like behind that little screen or whatever, and someone comes in to, confess their sins, and I would have to be that guy who sits there and says, wow, you're a real piece of shit. Like have you thought about just, quitting this whole Christianity thing because I don't think you're going to get to heaven. God definitely doesn't like you and you're acting like an ass. Like, oh, I would really appreciate this kind of sincere honesty in churches if we could come about this. That would be really good. Oh, okay. Next one. This one, this is very interesting to me. So earlier I had mentioned that it's kind of cool, even with a small channel like mine, and I do understand that I have a very modest channel in terms of YouTube scope. What have I got? Like 20 people watching my live stream. So I'm not exactly a YouTube star, right? But nevertheless, it is wild to think that you put out these videos or these live streams or what have you, and sometimes you reach people literally on the other side of the world. And this one caught my attention. I think Calcium Deficiency has commented before. I could be wrong on that, but they put a series of comments today on this video. And it said, this wasn't the first comment, but they said, also in Iran, there's many more atheists than you think. It's not allowed to say it in an official way, so don't listen to the numbers. I say it's closer to 30% of the people I know and 80% who just believe in a liberal way. But the 20% are extremely into it. They have all the positions of power, I'm afraid. So again, the first thought is, wow, I have, even one person watching my videos from Iran. That kind of blows me away. It's kind of wild to think that you can put out a video on anything and we saw earlier, I had a comment from someone in India, and I've had comments from people in China, and I know there's people in the chat right now that are in Europe. So it's kind of I don't want to get totally full of myself here, but it's kind of humbling. It's kind of humbling to know, like, damn, you put this stuff out and it's being seen at least by a handful of people across the world. It's kind of wild, especially to think that someone's seeing this in Iran, because I don't know much about Iran. I know that our fucktard of a president has decided to just start bombing everyone, and I have opinions about that. But it's been such a cloistered society for 50 years since the revolution, and since they brought in the Shah. Oh, I know it's been a series of Shahs, right? But to think that someone is there watching even one or two of my videos is wild, and it's very humbling. But then I also wanted to bring it up, not just to say, look at me, look at my channel that's getting across the world. But I love this comment because it says, there are many more atheists than you think. It's not allowed to say it in an official way. So this kind of goes back to a comment that I was talking about at the beginning of this live stream, where somebody's saying, well, atheism came around in 5 BC in India. Like, you don't know where atheism started. Nobody knows where atheism started, because even to this day, just like Calcium Deficiency is showing us, there are many people in many places in the world who, for very good reasons, unfortunately, do not well, for very practical reasons, let me say it that way. It's not good reasons. For very practical reasons, do not feel empowered to be able to actually publicly identify as atheists. Now, I'm not trying to tell you that the world has this crazy silent majority of atheists in it. I'm not trying to tell you that if we changed a few levers in society, suddenly 70, 80, 90% of people would come out of the woodwork and say, I'm an atheist. That's not true. But as he's pointing out, and of course, this is anecdotal evidence here, so I'm not saying that this is scientific on any level, but I also don't have any reason to doubt him. He's saying, at least as far as he can tell, it seems like it's closer to 30% of the people. I mean, if we took those as exclusive groups, this adds up to more than 100%, but I'm assuming he's implying that there's overlap in these groups. But, you got your hardcore theists, the 20% that are running things. And that's scary as hell. It's scary in Iran. It's scary in the United States. It's scary anywhere, having the hardcore theist in control. And I don't care what your religion is. I don't care what your belief system is. Having hardcore theist truly in control, is fucking scary. It should be scary to everyone. So, but, aside from the hardcore people who then control public discourse, they control who can identify as what. Then you have a much more under the covers kind of population of people who don't buy into all the bullshit, but they are not in a position to actually speak up and identify as not buying into all the bullshit. And don't get me wrong, you can say, I know a critic could say, Adam, this is Iran you're talking about. Iran is very extremist in terms of their religious fundamentalism. I'm not saying that every country in the world is like this, but I'm saying that I would say almost every country in the world, there's probably more atheists out there than publicly identify. Now, like in a place like Japan, which is incredibly atheist anyway, there's probably a very small delta between the people who publicly identify as atheists between the people and the people who are atheists, because they don't have much of an incentive to hide their atheism. But in Iran, in any Muslim country, in America, a lot of people don't feel comfortable identifying as atheist, or at least they don't, a lot of them will at least say, well, I believe in God. They'll give you some kind of generic bullshit. They may not go to church, they may not buy into all the extremism, but they will at least put a cover story in place so that they can't be identified as just not believing at all. And that's very common. So I appreciate Calcium Deficiency's words, and it's cool to have someone watching my stuff from Iran. That's really wild. I hope that they're safe. I think it's going to get worse before it gets better over there, thanks to my country. So I hope they're safe. Next comment. So this is I won't go through this all in detail, but I mean, this is another one of these comments that basically says, if I understand it correctly, God always answers prayers. Sometimes the answer is just no. But then again, one has to pray the right way, right? Not my will, but yours. And this is, I won't read that all. It's on screen. You guys can read it if you want. But this is, again, why I say that what's the point of even praying? Because half the time when you pray for something, anything, a couple things happen. Sometimes you just get it. Not because God brought it to you, but because life happens. You get it. The new job you wanted, you get it. Or, the good weather tomorrow, you get it. It doesn't mean God did shit. But more importantly, when you don't get it, people are like, well, you need to pray for God's will. I mean, why do I need to pray for the omnipotent creator of the universe to do his will? Wasn't he going to do his will regardless? Was God sitting around like, well, these are the things I want to do, but Adam hasn't prayed to allow me to do the things that I want to do. So I guess I'm just going to have to wait until Adam prays for me to do the things that I already wanted to do. No, that's stupid. That's totally stupid. I mean, would you go, if you were in the military, would you go to the general and say, General, hey, can I get a word for a minute? I just want to let you know that I want you to do with the military whatever you wanted to do. He's the general. Of course, he was going to do that already. Like he's not waiting for your little sorry ass to give him permission to do what he already wanted to do. That doesn't make any sense. That's stupid. It's just so stupid. But this is the kind of crap that we get from Christian thinking about prayer. So, on to the next comment. Let's see here. What's the next thing that we got? So James says, the Christian dilemma that doesn't trouble an atheist. Prayer is asking an all-powerful, all-wise, all-knowing God to change his divine plan to please you. To please you. Think about how fucking arrogant that is. I want the creator of the universe to change his divine plan because I wanted good weather for the soccer match tomorrow. Like, what the hell? Why should he, when you are the idiot and God is the genius, stop with your arrogant prayers and submit to God's perfect plan for you? That's beautiful. Thank you, James. James is a very frequent commenter on here, but that's just beautiful. I mean, theists don't even want to acknowledge this. I mean, they want to tell you that God never changes his mind, and they want to tell you that God has a plan for all of us. But then they also want to tell you that, but if I pray for something tomorrow, he might change the entire plan because of me. Because me, damn it. Oh, there is nothing more centered in the universe than a Christian. They think that the entire damn universe just revolves around them. Oh my gosh. I don't think that Christians believe that the sun revolves around the earth. I think that they believe that the sun and the earth and everything else revolves around them. Just everything is their own little universe. Okay. Next comment. This one I thought was interesting because I thought it was just an interesting point of discussion. You know, it says believing in the Trinity is like believing in a flat earth. I don't actually concur with this statement. And I'm only going to say this because I don't believe in the Trinity. But the flat earth is an empirical, or, you know, the lack of a flat earth is an empirical, demonstrable, scientific fact. I mean, it's been proven so many times that it's not a flat earth, that it's so sad that there are still people in this world who want to hold to the idea of a flat earth. But at least it is demonstrably, provably wrong. Whereas the Trinity, as much as I don't like it, as much as I think that it's dogma run amok, it is nevertheless religious bickering. You know, I mean, I don't think it makes a single bit of sense to talk about it's one God, but it's three. It's one, but it's three. Wait, what? How does that work? But in the context of I'm a Christian and I believe stupid shit that can never happen anyway, okay, I guess it kind of makes sense in that regard. Because, I mean, as stupid as I think the Trinity is, I mean, they also believe in a talking fucking donkey. They believe in a talking donkey. So once you've taken the step to believe in a talking donkey, I guess one God, that's three gods, that's actually just one God, I guess in a sick sort of way, it kind of makes sense. It makes sense from the perspective that none of this makes sense, and it's not going to make sense, but just nod and take your soma and just go along and say, yes, pastor. Yes, preacher. 3 equals 1. 1 equals 3. Yes. I mean, honestly, every time you go into church for sermon or service, they should be playing Pink Floyd's The Wall, you know, like the whole time, like just another Christian in the wall. because they've just completely disconnected their brain. So anyway, back to the original comment. Although I appreciate the spirit of the comment very much. If I was being really anal retentive about it, I can't totally agree with it, just because flat Earth is scientifically disproven, whereas Trinity, just like every other bullshit Christian doctrine, will never be proven or disproven. It's just what a bunch of old men agreed to at councils a few thousand years ago, or close to it. Next comment. I have like 5 or 6 more comments to get through, so we are plowing through. Yay. Let's continue. So if you guys have something you want me to interject, y'all need to speak up, because pretty soon we'll be at the end. All right, let's do this. So this was, another comment on my video about Glenn Scrivener and Dan McClellan. This says, consider the sources of all information. He's a freaking Mormon. Mormonism is as easy to refute as Scientology, but Dan believes this nonsense. Crazy world we live in. So this is a fucking idiot talking right here. First of all, because yes, Dan does associate with the Mormon Church. I don't know if you kind of follow around the periphery of things that he says. I'm not sure how active he is in the Mormon Church anymore. Although I do know that he's very fastidious about saying that he doesn't speak about his faith on any of his videos. And I understand why he does this. He does this because he wants his work, his public work, to be about his scholarship and not about his faith. Because as soon as you start talking about your faith, it then becomes this pissing contest between Christians and Mormons, or between Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses, or whatever. And that would undermine the scholarly objectives that he's trying to achieve. So I understand why he does not want to talk about his faith. I do suspect that he's not exactly this hardcore Mormon, if he ever was. He's worked for the Mormon Church before, although he does not now, from what I understand. And he has critiqued Mormon doctrine before. It's just that being a scholar of the Bible, it's not the Mormon Bible, it's the scholar of the Bible. He tends to spend the vast majority of his time critiquing Christian/Judaic ideas, because that's what the Bible is. So I do, understand for people who don't like Mormonism, you might think that that's, James says Dan's relationship with Mormonism is rather complex. Yeah, I definitely think that's true. And I think it's true. I also think it's important to remember that, Dan doesn't really want to talk about his faith. And I understand why he doesn't, because it kind of misses the whole damn point. And that's why I brought up this comment here. I think it's a stupid fucking comment. And here's why. Because in this video where Glenn's trying to take apart Dan, he's not talking about edicts of Mormon faith versus Christian faith. I know some people will say that he is, because Mormons in general don't believe in the Trinity, and Christians in general do. But that's overly simplistic, because there's Christians who don't believe in the Trinity. They're a minority, but they exist. But this isn't about your dogma. This is about Dan looking at the text and basically saying, show me this damn Trinity that you're talking about. You can't. I mean, Orthodox Christians will pull up a whole bunch of verses that they will try to use as evidence for the Trinity. And honestly, I'm going to do videos about this in the future. They're laughable. They are laughably stupid. And I don't care if you believe in the Trinity. That's not my problem. The whole religion to me is ridiculous. So believe in the Trinity all you want. But the way that they pull these verses out of the Old Testament, and they don't even understand what the context of those verses is. And then they try to say, see, that's Jesus. Or that's the Trinity right there. Like, they make shit up just to solidify this worldview that they bolted onto the Bible hundreds of years after the last books were written. And that, to me, is the critical point that Dan is trying to get to. You don't have to be a Mormon to agree with Dan. You don't have to, hate Christianity to agree with Dan. I mean, Dan is just, and I know I'm sounding like the biggest cuck boy here for Dan, but I really think that his work is pretty cool. And he, for the most part, I could sit here and bore you with a few videos from him where I'm like, yeah, I don't think he hit the mark on this one, or I think he's biased on this one. But that's picking nits, honestly, because as a whole, when you go through his videos, I'm just always impressed by how he does seem to be fastidiously holding to the facts of what the texts say. And then where there's questions in the text, trying to communicate to us what is the general scholarly view about what they think this text says. And for someone like Glenn Scrivener to just, throw darts at him in such a disingenuous way, I think really denigrates his whole position and makes him look really stupid, to be honest with you. Yeah, James says, yeah, he worked for the church. He was their lead translator for something like 10 years. Yeah, I don't think he is anymore, but he did do that for quite a while. And he's done a few things critiquing like the Book of Mormon or critiquing Mormon doctrine. But I understand why he doesn't do a lot of stuff critiquing Mormon doctrine, because he's a scholar of the Bible. And quite frankly, Mormonism is, I don't know, in America, I don't know what the numbers are, but it's like 10% or, less of all religious people in America are. So, you could sit here, like I could do all of my channel talking about Islam. I mean, I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that because I don't know enough about Islam to really dive into it deeply. But let's also be frank, if I want to try to reach a bigger audience in America, it's much better to talk about Christianity, whether you're talking pro or con, because that is the dominant social paradigm of this country, at least. So I like this comment here from Grumpy. It says, many of the scholars that I follow are various flavors of Christian. A.B. Higashi, I'm probably saying that wrong, is a good example of someone who asserts belief in the Trinity while bluntly acknowledging that it's not in the Bible. So that I really appreciate, because as I've already said, I'm not mad that somebody is a Trinitarian. I mean, it's a doctrine. And I have seen the arguments that have been stacked up for why they think that, the Bible supports Trinitarianism. And I don't think that they're bad arguments. I just think that every one of those arguments actually has a much better explanation. But that's me. Assert the Trinity as your belief all day long. The problem that I have with Trinitarians is that they then want to force everyone else to follow behind them in lockstep. And they want to brand you as a heretic when you don't believe it. And probably worse than that, they want to talk down to you as though it's obvious. So I like what you're saying here about, I don't know about A.B. Higashi, but I like this because I don't have any problem with a Christian who says, look, this is what I believe. I believe there's three gods, but they're one. And it's confusing, but this is what I believe. And this is just my faith. Okay, fine. That's your faith. I don't have a problem with that. Believe whatever it is that you want to believe. But then when you want to talk down to me as though it's obvious from reading the Bible that the Trinity's there, and if you just read the Bible, you would be a Trinitarian too. Now you're insulting my intelligence. Now that's just a really shitty thing to say, because I've read the whole damn Bible multiple times, and I have asserted one of the thought experiments I like to tell people is, if you could take 1,000 people who somehow had never been exposed to Christianity, they never read the Bible, they weren't exposed to Christian doctrine or whatever, and you sat them down in a room and you had them read the Bible from the first page of Genesis to the last page of Revelation, and then you quizzed them afterwards, not a single one of those people would say, ooh, I see a Trinity there. I think that there's one God, but there's three gods, but they're actually one God. Like, nobody would come out of that saying that. Not a single person. That's something that has to be drilled into you as a Christian. And then once it's drilled into them, they don't even have the self-awareness to at least admit that, well, it's just something that we take on faith. I don't have a problem with people who can be honest and just say, look, it's something that we take on faith. Okay, that's honest. I get it. Every religion especially theistic religions, are going to have, I think, things that you have to take on faith if you are going to follow that religion. And if you want to take this on faith, then take it on faith. But don't talk down to me like I'm an idiot. Like it's so obvious and anyone who reads the Bible would know it. Because first of all, there's an entire population of people who wrote the Bible. They're called Jews who don't agree with you. They don't agree that all these references from the Old Testament are magic references to Jesus, even though it doesn't say it anywhere in there. No, the people who wrote the damn book, and I know the actual people who wrote the book aren't around, but I mean, the culture that wrote the book don't even think, they think you're fucking nuts. They think you're an idiot. But anyway, we'll move on from that one. This is kind of on the same note here. So it says, if the Trinity is so obvious, why did it take the church 300 years to define? The early church was the wild, wild west. The Trinity wasn't resolved in the Bible, but only after an unbaptized Roman Empire forced church leaders to establish a single creed. To be as fair as I can be, I will tell you that the concept of the Trinity did not take 300 years to define. It took 325 years. I think the first council of Nicaea was in 325 CE. I'm not going to look that up, but I think I'm pretty close. It took 325 years for it to be codified as formal doctrine of the church. I think the first one who formally brought up the Trinity as a doctrinal idea was Athanasius, but don't quote me on that. And of course, other people, because Athanasius was middle second century, I think, when he wrote that. And there were, to be fair, there were even people writing down and discussing concepts that we may recognize as being proto-Trinitarian before Athanasius. So it's not like Athanasius brought the idea up in his head and wrote it down and said, look, this is my new revelation. It was more of an evolution of thought. These early Christian church leaders were trying, as Dan points out, they were trying to solve a problem, okay? Well, they're trying to solve multiple problems. But the biggest problem they're trying to solve is that we think that Jesus is the man. You know, that's probably the wrong word to use here, the man, right? But they think they think he's God, like we should be worshiping Jesus. And yet they absolutely did not want to say that they're polytheistic. So how do we square that circle? We have, Jesus, we have Yahweh, and then we also have this Holy Spirit thing that we don't know how to define. There are other issues, but I'm oversimplifying it. But then they're trying to solve that problem theologically. And over time, they evolved this idea of the Trinity. Like I said, I think the first time it was written down formally, I think it was Athanasius. And concepts of the Trinity, to be fair, were written down before this. But no one had identified it as the Trinity before then. So it was evolving, but it was not codified until the first Council of Nicaea in, again, I think it's 325 CE. This is another comment here from our Indian friend, Krishnan. Once again, we have no punctuation, so we won't go through all of this, but it says, thanks, Skep, word Adam of Nola, for your intense study, but your sarcasm is okay because conquering a land with army is different than visiting Spain with your friends. So I'm just, without trying to read through all this I'm just going to say that he kind of missed my point. In Godfrey Bible Study, in Joshua, they tell you that they conquered everything. There are several passages where it makes it sound like they won. They went into the Holy Land and they won everything. But then there are also many other passages where it's clear that no, they didn't. That there were still Canaanites around. There were still Jebusites around. There were still cities that they hadn't conquered. I mean, there was still a lot that just didn't get conquered the way Yahweh had promised it would be conquered. And yet, especially near the end of Joshua, they start writing in these verses that basically say, and we conquered the whole damn thing. That's not exactly what it says, but it says, I'd have to pull it up, but it basically says, and we conquered everything. And it just feels like this really sad retconning. So the example I gave in the videos, I said, could you imagine if I just showed up in Spain one day, I get off the plane, and then I say, I have conquered Spain. I mean, no one in Spain knows that I've conquered them. No one cares because they would laugh at the idea that I've conquered them. But rather than own up to the fact that I haven't really conquered Spain, instead, in my chronicles, I'm going to write down, and Adam conquered all of Spain. Like, it doesn't matter that it doesn't map to reality. I'm just going to write it down anyway, because, hey, it's my book, and I can write whatever the hell I want to. So that was what I was talking about there that Krishnan was replying to. Okay, we have four of these left. If you've been here the whole time, drop a comment, because I mean, you are a glutton for punishment. So Asian 432 says that statement, he's referring to what Glenn was talking about, that God is love, and yet neglect to tell why God has to kill the firstborn children and animals to release his people. The worst part is that people, you took a break for dinner. What the fuck, positivity? That's not allowed. The worst part is that people suffer from the plagues does not portray a loving God to me. I only wanted to bring up this comment because I know I shouldn't care, but at this point, one of the most grating statements to me, and Glenn says this shit all the time, is God is love. God is love. God is love. They just repeat it like a mantra. They repeat it over and over again, like if I just say it enough times, it will be true. And yet, the character, especially of Yahweh, I would argue that even the character of Jesus is questionable as to how much he's really love. Okay. But I do understand why people in general take the teachings of the Gospels and they say, well, Jesus, that was a cool, loving guy, right? Again, we could quibble about that, but I get it. I get it. If you want to tell me Jesus is love, that's fine. But Yahweh, to tell me that Yahweh is love? Oh man. I mean, that is gaslighting 101 right there. And then it gets worse because Christians demand to cling to this idea of the Trinity. And the reason I say it makes it worse is because if you wanted to accept that Jesus is truly his own dude, right? He's his own person, you know, whether you want to call him a god or a demigod or whatever, then it would be easier to accept that, hey, you know, Yahweh's got some issues. He's got some issues, but Jesus, that was a cool dude. But according to the Trinity, it's all the same dude, which really undermines this whole idea that even if you think that all of the quotes of Jesus in the Gospels are beautiful and loving, which they're not, but let's just say that they are, you still then have to square the idea that, but Jesus is Yahweh according to your Trinitarian bullshit. And in the Old Testament, he's not love at all. In fact, one of the main times that they identify Yahweh with an emotion is that they say he is jealous. Not jealous with a lowercase j like they're describing his demeanor, with a capital J like this is his name. His name is jealous. How is jealousy love? I mean, if you're a stalker, you probably think it's love. But if you're a well-adjusted person, it's not love. It's disgusting. Okay. 3 to go. Ooh, where'd I go? This was interesting to me. We've had I always get a lot of comments from Lewis. He's a great friend of the channel, if you will. But it says, excuse me, Christians need the talking snake to be literal, because no talking snake, no literal 6-day creation, no literal Adam and Eve means no original sin. No original sin means no need for Jesus to come down, be crucified, and resurrect. I will tell you this. As someone who is a Christian for 40 years, I do not totally agree with this statement. I think that there are very reasonable Christians out there. Yes, I do believe that. And I think that the more reasonable Christians don't need this talking snake. But I do like Lewis's comment, and I think that it is important because there are many Christians, the evangelicals, the fundamentalists, etc., who probably do need the talking snake because they see it all as this cohesive whole. And to his point, it's like dominoes. You know, if you let the one domino fall, then the rest of the dominoes start falling. Now, for more practical Christians, like a lot of Catholics or Anglicans, you know, people that don't feel invested in everything having to be literal, I think that it is possible to be a sincere Christian without feeling like you have to cling to this bullshit. But for many American evangelicals especially, yeah, they need that talking snake, just like they need all the rest of it to plug in to this doctrinal theology that they have. Next to last comment is, this is just a short one, but I just liked it, from my Godfrey Bible study about Joshua 11 through 18. It says, it seems like Yahweh was taking L's in Joshua. He really was. It's funny because I liked this comment partially because when you read Joshua, a lot of Christians will read that like it's this conquering chronicle, like, hey, Joshua came in and kicked all this ass. And you can read it selectively to believe that. But if you read it honestly and you read all the words and you don't just skim over the parts that are inconvenient, yeah, it seems like Yahweh took a lot of L's in Joshua. But that's not the way that a lot of Christians will paint the book of Joshua to you. They will paint it like it's this conquering, awesome chronicle of Yahweh kicking ass, but it's not. So Grumpy says, I have far more respect for Christians who subscribe to a literal six-day creation than those who try to squeeze the Big Bang into Genesis 1. Of course, the most respect for those who realize that it's story. I can't actually claim to agree with you there, Grumpy. I think I know what you're getting at. I mean, there's a certain, with literalists, literalist, fundamentalist, evangelicals, I mean, those three terms tend to get kind of used interchangeably. There is a certain begrudging respect that I can say, hey, at least your thoughts are consistent. If you have taken the perspective that the Bible's literal, every damn word of it, it's stupid, but it's consistent. At least you have a rubric that you can always judge. You can say, I mean, it doesn't help you to judge on moral issues because the Bible is horribly contradictory on moral issues. But in terms of saying what happened, in terms of trying to understand history as it's in the Bible, although that's ridiculous, I can say, well, at least you're consistent. At least you're saying, hey, it's in the book or it's not. If it's not in the book, I don't believe it. If it's in the book, I believe it. That part I can be with you. I guess I can't totally agree with you on the broader point because, as a Christian for 40 years, I did think that I saw Genesis as being figurative. It was a metaphor, but it had these big, broad enough strokes that I could say, well, I can see how the Big Bang fits into the idea of what they're describing here, even though it's really fuzzy, right? And it wasn't because I stayed awake at night trying to figure out how to make the two ideas work together. But I did spend a lot of time trying to figure out how I could make apologies for as many, not being an apologist, but try to make apologies for as much stuff in the Bible as I could. I had to keep trying to figure out how I could work my understanding of reality with what was in the Holy Book. But reasonable people can disagree with that. Grumpy says people use Genesis 1 and the first day of creation to squeeze in the Big Bang, but Genesis 1:2 says the earth precedes the sun. Even if true, that's not the freaking Big Bang. So yeah, absolutely true. I mean, it's even when you try to accommodate it, you're still left making a lot of uncomfortable compromises. That's the simple fact. And of course, some people won't even admit that they're making uncomfortable compromises. But for me, it was easier because I would say, well, this kind of fits into Genesis 1. But at the end of the day, I didn't really care that much because I always felt like this is mostly myth anyway. So I never felt like I had to worry about how well it fit into everything. So here's the last comment that I wanted to go through tonight. If you have additional comments, throw them up there. And this is from Positivity, our friend here who's in the chat. So it says, and this, I wanted to bring this up because Positivity brought up this point, and I was like, yeah, I actually missed this when I was doing my reaction video. He says, he's talking about Glenn Scrivener here. He says, you didn't even shame him for his pretty clear misunderstanding and misrepresentation of one of the modern Bible's biggest lies. That all the times it uses all caps like the Lord smote the mosquito bites, etc. It is really talking about Yuhu Woohoo, or Yahweh, the petty and not too bright Canaanite storm god. The reason this guy is so clueless about univocality is I suspect that we here in the US are more experienced with really virulent fundies who derive a lot of their awfulness from a combination of impressive parochial ignorance and a belief in the literal word of God, cherry-picked from an Iron Age book. So I'm glad that you brought this up, Positivity, because yeah, in that video, Glenn literally on 2 occasions in the video said Jesus is Lord, capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D. He said it exactly like that. And it's so funny because Lord, and prior to that video, I would have assumed Glenn knew this, but now I don't even know if he does. I did a whole video on this before that every time you see that capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D in the Bible, it is a stand-in. It was in the Hebrew, it doesn't say Lord. In the Hebrew, it says the Tetragrammaton, which is Yahweh, Yod He Vav He. And that is not Jesus. Yod He Vav He is supposed to be the name of God. Now, some people would still argue that Yod He Vav He transliterates into a Hebrew word, which some people would argue was not the actual name of God. But every time the Bible explicitly says this is his name, it uses the Tetragrammaton, which is Yod He Vav He, YHWH in English, which we typically speak as Yahweh. So when someone like Glenn so stridently asserts, and yeah, Positivity, it is choose your own vowels, which is, that's always amazes me about, because Hebrew is not the only ancient language that does that, but the fact that you ever had ancient languages that don't have vowels blows my mind. But the fact that Glenn so stridently asserts that Jesus is Lord, and it's one thing to say Jesus is Lord, because the word Lord just, means the ruler, like the big guy, right? But then he specifically goes so far as to say Jesus is Lord, capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D. Well, if you know your Bible, Glenn, that's referring to the Tetragrammaton. And that's not Jesus. That's the Father. And I know we could say maybe this is splitting hairs, because under Trinitarian bullshit, the Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost, they're the same thing, right? So maybe that's where he's going with it. But he asserts it the way that you hear Glenn assert it in that video. He makes it sound like every time in the Old Testament you see capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D, that it's referring to Jesus. And that, even by the most liberal Trinitarian viewpoint, is just patently wrong. It's so wrong, because capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D always in modern Bibles is a stand-in for the Tetragrammaton. And the Tetragrammaton is always the name of the Father. It is never the name of Jesus. There is no place in the New Testament, or the Bible for that matter, where the authors even had the idea that capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D should somehow refer to Jesus. Now, there are times in the Gospels when they refer to Jesus as Lord, I'm pretty sure, but it's not put with capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D, because when they refer to someone like Jesus as Lord, they're referring to it in the more colloquial sense, like, oh, Lord, great guy, our master or whatever. They're not using it there as a stand-in for the Tetragrammaton. So it was very telling that Glenn made that what seemed to be a very blatant mistake in that video, although I can't say it's surprising because his whole video was an utter shit show. But so be it. So Grumpy says, not in that direction, but there is an argument that at least sometimes Lord in the New Testament refers to Yahweh. I would have to see what you're talking about. I mean, I know they say Jesus is Lord, but do they actually say Jesus is Lord and then put all capitals Lord? I don't know. I'll have to look that up. I won't do it here in the live stream, but I'll have to look that up, because I'm pretty sure that when they do that in the Tetragrammaton or in the New Testament, that they're purposely using the lowercase. I wonder if I can just get it to come up like this. So I'm not sure where it says specifically Lord, but like, so for example, let me give you some of these examples here from the search. So notice here. Well, that's not a good, because here he's talking. That's Jesus talking, but he's actually talking about Yahweh there. So that's a bad example. Right. Well, yeah. So the caps part, I don't know when they started using the caps part, but the caps part is a modern convention. So like in the Hebrew Bible, it'll have the Tetragrammaton, but then when Jewish theologians or whatever, when they read it, they will say Adonai, which is, well, they'll usually say Adonai. I mean, sometimes they usually say Adonai, or they'll say Hashem, which is the name, or they'll say Elohim, which is God, generic God name. And there's a fourth one that they use sometimes, but usually they use Adonai. But usually so like here, then Peter said to Jesus, Lord, it is good for us to be here if you wish. So Peter refers to Jesus as Lord, but notice they do not put this here in the all caps, because the implication here is that when Peter said this, he was literally saying the word Lord. He wasn't saying Yahweh. He wasn't saying the Tetragrammaton. He was saying Lord, which is why in this case it's only capital L because it's the beginning of a sentence. Although they might use capital L even if it's in the middle of a sentence, because they might say that it's a formal noun. But they don't capitalize it the way they do in the Old Testament when it's all caps. Whenever you see it as all caps, it is. So here's another example. Jesus said, take away the stone. Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, Lord. Okay, once again, this is not the Tetragrammaton. It's not the same thing. So I could be wrong on this, but I don't think that even anywhere in the New Testament they ever used the Tetragrammaton to refer to Jesus. Whereas if we just look for Lord, of course, we're going to get thousands of things coming from the Old Testament. And in the Old Testament, it always looks like this. It's that funky, font where it's all caps, although the L is always bigger than the ORD. This is a visual cue that tells you in the Hebrew, this is the Tetragrammaton. And in every place in the Old Testament where they're actually referring to Yahweh himself, they will use this same convention where it's capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D. So it says, Grumpy says, it's ambiguous. Kyrios means Lord, and that's Greek honorific that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with Yahweh, but Yahweh was translated as Kyrios too in Greek. Okay, so Yahweh can be translated as Kyrios in Greek, but this is what I'm telling you. The key is not in the fact that they use Lord. The key is that when you see it in all caps like this, that is a visual sign that in the original Hebrew, this is the Tetragrammaton. So in the original Hebrew, this doesn't actually say Lord. In the original Hebrew, it says Yahweh. But when they, out of convention, when we have translated this into English, almost every English translation that I know of has, by convention, decided to convert the Tetragrammaton into capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D. They do that because there's a dichotomy that arises from this, because if you talk to a Jewish scholar and you watch him write the Bible, he will write the Tetragrammaton any place that they're supposed to refer to Yahweh. But if you ask him to read the Bible, every time he comes across this, he will say usually Adonai, which means Lord. So, yeah, Jesus is not in the Old Testament, right? So anyway, I'll have to look into that some more, but I don't think that there's, I think that, the original point was that Glenn was very specific in his video about saying capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D, Jesus is Lord. But that is a very confusing statement, and it actually makes me wonder if he actually understands how the Tetragrammaton is even used in the Bible, in the Old Testament, because that literally is just outright wrong with regards to the way it's used in the Old Testament. All right, ladies, gentlemen, it has been a show. It's been a couple good hours plus. We've gone through some crappy arguments, some fun arguments, some crazy comments. I want to thank every one of you for being here. I hope that everyone toasts with something, whatever it is you're enjoying on a Friday evening, or whatever time it is there, wherever you're at. I appreciate you guys for hanging out with me. I'm glad that we have a little community here. We've had on average of like 20, 25 of us throughout the viewing, in terms of total numbers of viewers. Appreciate it, positivity. Appreciate all of you. Thank you for all of your comments. And I will see you guys in the next video or the next live stream. But lo, I say unto you, stay skeptical.